Welcome to Shalom World Podcast.
Well, hi everybody. Thanks so much for the privilege of your time and welcome to the Real Men series. My name's Jonathan Doyle and it's a great privilege to be walking with you over the next 12 episodes as we explore some of the absolute key issues in the life of men today. I think you'd agree there's many challenges these days to being a great man. What does it mean to be an authentic man? How do we operate in relationships? How do we find a deeper sense of purpose? How do we find ourselves in the life of the church? These are topics that we probably don't talk about enough, so we're really going to enjoy this journey with you. I'm joined in the studio today by my good friend, a man who's done an enormous amount of work on some of these important topics, Robert Falzon. Robert, welcome to the Real Men series.
Hey Jonathan, thanks. It's such a privilege and an honour to be with you as well for this 12-part series. I'm looking forward to journeying with you. Maybe we begin by telling a little bit about our stories and we'll move into the topic as we go through to this session.
Yeah, you know, it's funny how life brings you to a certain moment in life where you have a chance to talk about some of these topics. I guess my professional background started in education. I started teaching, really loved working with young people. Even then I had an interest in kind of peak performance, excellence, how can we help people really develop?
Yeah.
I spent some time in the education space, did a lot of postgraduate work, so did some postgraduate study in leadership and management, and then built a successful media business with my wife, Karen. I've been married now almost 20 years. We have 3 very young children. At one point, we had 3 children under the age of 3.5.
Good job.
So there'll be some people out there who know exactly what that's like when you're trying to build a media business with a very young family. So we had some success in that, and then I began doing a lot of speaking work. So at this point, I've spoken live to probably a bit over 450,000 people around the world. These days, I spend my time split between the media business and also getting to do work like this, which I really enjoy. So that's kind of my background. Now, to you, take us through a little bit about your background. What brings you into the studio today?
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I was a businessman for many years, a successful businessman. I ran a large interior fit-out furniture manufacturing business and made some money, lost some money, and then made some money, sold into a public company and then sold out in 2005, and then 2007 cashed out. Lucky to cash out in 2007.
Nicely timed.
Yes, that's right, accidental fortune. I remember being in Mass one day in the summer of 2003, sitting in our pew, the same pew that we sat in every Sunday, my wife and I and our 4 kids. And Father was into his homily and I wasn't. And I was a bit disconnected, disillusioned, distracted, all the D words. And I looked around, as you do when you're distracted in Mass, and I was looking at all the people there, and I ran into this question, like it was an interior question. I looked around and I saw lots of women, mostly with grey hair, a few men, but most of them with grey hair. And I all of a sudden saw a reality, and that was that I was one of the youngest men in the church, and I was one of the few with family and a wife. And I had this question: where are all the men? Yeah. Where are all the men? Well, I went to the Archbishop at the time, Archbishop John. I knocked on his door and I said, Archbishop, do you know about this situation? Yeah. Where are all the men? Your Grace, it's a disgrace, I said. And I said, what are you going to do about it? And he turned to me in a most pastoral, brilliant moment and said, what are you going to do about it?
Good question.
And I took that as permission.
Yeah.
And in 2003, I started Men Alive with a bunch of guys. And we've been running mostly parish missions for 15 years, 26 dioceses, 22,000 men. Wow. So that's the journey to here. Wow. But the real journey now is over the next 12 weeks. Yep. And we start this series with Where Are All the Men?
I think what you've shared already is so important. I have a favourite saying that I heard many years ago, which is that you don't need a whole bunch of great ideas to change your life. You just need one good idea that you're actually prepared to use. And I think what we want to do in this series is explore with some fantastic guests, the few key ideas that men need at this moment in history to really flourish and to step into what's possible for them. But let's open this up. This concept of where are all the men? In what areas of culture do you see this playing out at the moment?
Yeah. So, in society, for example, let's just take the whole of the society.
Yep.
You mentioned culture, and you mentioned a moment in time, which is really important. Like, I think we are in a moment in time, really, and there's a lot of data around men and boys and growing up and manhood and all of that, and we can explore a little bit of that. But where are all the men in society? Where is this noble, valiant, heroic manhood that like someone like Ernst Shackleton had with his little ad in the paper and wanting 50 men and got 5,000 people apply. Where is that manhood in society? Where are all the men in marriages? Where are all the men in church? Where are all the fathers? Yeah. Where are all the fathers? And where is manhood today? Could I say this, that manhood is at risk?
Yeah, I think so. I think often what I like to say in seminars is I think we're living in one of the most dislocating moments of world history for men. The example that I gave in a recent speech was the Industrial Revolution begins in 1760. Now, before that, the vast majority of boys and men spent a lot more time together. They would often share professions. Our society was much more tribal, it was smaller. Yeah. So our culture had a huge investment in making sure that men developed and contributed. Now, for most of human history, that meant fighting in wars, raising children, and working. Now, we can critique
on the land,
or in small cottage industries. In the last sort of 400 or 500 years. And now we can critique that and say, well, that was so narrow, and men only got to do this. The fact was, it kind of worked for a very long period of time, in the sense that men knew where they were, what was expected of them, and what sort of roles they were meant to fulfill. Now, that's been highly critiqued, but what's happened now is there's a great dislocation. I think for vast numbers of boys and men, there's a deep sense of, what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to open doors? Am I supposed to be emotional and vulnerable? Am I supposed to be strong and aggressive? And often we critique masculine strength, even aggression. But I often say to people, there are contexts in which masculine aggression is incredibly important. Yeah. As a student of history, you look at, like the Pacific War. We're recently reading a lot on the Pacific War, and the courage and the strength and the ability for men to fight was really important. So my point is, all of a sudden, in a very small historical window, the ways in which men understood themselves and their place in society and how they contributed has completely blown apart. Now, we can all agree that maybe there's some aspects where that had to happen, but I would say that for many young men particularly, there's a deep sense of, who am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? What does it mean to be an effective man? And for me, to maybe jump to the end of the series, I guess there is an answer to that, and we're going to explore it in the episodes, but I think that there is a key dynamic of what it means to be a fine man. It's actually a very simple concept, but not easy.
Yeah, and lots of questions being asked of manhood, because of this misplaced aggression, misplaced energy, let's put it this way, misplaced strength. Yeah. A lot of young men going, what will I bring my strength to? Yeah. And there's nowhere to bring your strength. There's an innate strength in a man that he has to bring somewhere. Correct. If there isn't a place to bring it appropriately, manhood gets lost. What will I bring my strength to? And the other big question is, who will tell me when I'm a man? Yeah. Who will tell me when I'm a man? Who told you when you were a man?
One of the crucial things anthropologists agree on is that for young women, they don't tend to carry that great internal question about when I become a woman.
The body tells.
The body tells them it's a biological progression. Now, yes, boys hit puberty, but it's a very different experience for them. So again, as I mentioned before, every culture in world history was heavily invested in the transition of boyhood to manhood, heavily invested. Yep. Because in tribal cultures, if you didn't transition boys to men, every culture realised that manhood or masculine energy, left to itself, tends to do usually self-indulgent and destructive things. Yes. So all these cultures had an investment in going, how do we channel this energy and strength? Now that question remains, but the fancy language these days is they talk about pro-social. What ways can we help men to use that strength and energy in really appropriate ways?
Yeah, and these guys are playing games that simulate life. So they're having the battles in privacy on their devices, looking for the adventure, looking for the great quest, looking even for the beauty that man is written into their soul. These quests that men are looking for. And let's ask another question. Where are all the men in marriage?
Look, marriage is, as we can agree, is under a lot of pressure.
Yep.
I've been thinking recently, being married almost 20 years, something that's rarely talked about is how hard it is.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't mean it's not wonderful and has all its wonderful moments, but just how difficult and challenging it is.
It is difficult.
To do it well.
It is hard.
And to love someone effectively. So we're not often describing that truth to people early enough and bringing a generation of young men through. Young men have, I think, also taken this idea of that their strength is primarily for their own personal enjoyment and personal pleasure.
Yep.
It's a cultural narrative. We're going to talk in the series about the role of pornography and how that shaped an entire consciousness for a generation of young men. So I think there'll be men watching this, and you would agree, marriage, if you can do the work, is the making of you. Fundamentally, it directs and challenges. And even Augustine was saying that back in the 4th century. He basically said it takes this masculine energy and places it at the service of something greater than itself.
Yep.
So these are the kind of great themes that have been flowing through the masculine question for centuries. And I think we're forgetting them culturally. You can add to that the feminist movement. Now, I want to handle that very sensitively. John Paul II clearly said, he goes, it was needed. It was a needed movement. But also, we've probably come to a point in history where it's accelerated and can also be quite dislocating for young men in terms of how am I supposed to relate to women, or how am I supposed to treat women. And without mentorship, without a core of good men who know who they are, bringing that younger generation through, we have some challenges, we have some work to do. Yeah,
like the last 100 years has been an era where the erosion of manhood and the attack on manhood has been really significant. Like you talked about the Industrial Revolution, which was prior to that. Then we had these 2 big world wars, where generations of men went away and didn't come back.
Correct.
And then we had another war, which is called the Sexual Revolution. Hugh Hefner and Playboy magazine and all that stuff that happened then. The sexual revolution, which actually got into the DNA of a man and twisted it.
The sexual revolution arguably kicks off 1968. Before that, for most of human history, and again, there were always exceptions, there were always men doing the wrong thing.
That's true.
But masculine sexual energy was always envisioned as being embedded in a context of relationship. Raising children, and every culture didn't get this perfectly right. You can even go back to the Romans, they would have concubines and stuff. But in general, there was a kind of broad global idea that masculine sexual energy had to be deployed into a context of building community and relationships. Now that lasts until about 1968. And then the great offer of the sexual revolution was simply to decouple male sexual energy and just place it in the context of pleasure. That concept alone changed so much. So men suddenly lost this sense of responsibility. Of taking responsibility for their sexual self. So that stuff's been seismic, and as you know, the data on what happens when we've done that.
Massive.
I used to say in seminars to young men that any young man can get a woman pregnant, but to love a woman effectively requires only men can do that. And I used to joke that it's a fierce place to really step into that space, and I know one of our guests is going to talk about that topic as well, but only men can do that, and to do it with a self-sacrificial sense. So there's an absence of men in marriage. There's a lot to do.
And men are dislocated from themselves now. Like personally, a man doesn't know who he is. We talked about that. But he doesn't know how to have relationships with other men.
Correct.
And we'll talk about that in the coming series as well. Doesn't know how to have relationships with women, intimacy and sexuality. We're going to talk about that in the coming series. He doesn't know how to have a relationship with God. We're going to talk about that as well. And he doesn't know how to have a relationship with the church. So we talked about marriage. We'll have a quick look at the marriage scene. 46% of all marriages end in divorce in this country. In the world, there's about the same percentages across all white Western countries.
We'll put a 17-year-old male behind the wheel of a car and say, here is a 400-kilo piece of steel that you can drive at 120 kilometres or, for our American friends, 80 miles an hour. But we're going to teach you how to do it. We're going to make you do tests, and we're going to make you demonstrate all these hours of practice.
P-plates, green and pink, whatever.
But then we create a cultural narrative where we go, you meet someone, you fall in love, then you just get married, or you live together, then get married, and then you're going to totally figure out how to be married. We give them no training. And this is where I think the church has got a huge opportunity that we're probably not doing very well, is we really got to step into these realities for men, such as marriage, such as parenting, such as friendships, such as life, such as dealing with pornography addiction, internet addiction, purposelessness.
Yeah, all of that.
But our church, I think, it has been we've sort of held back a bit from that. And I think it's time that we need to start speaking about the issues.
It's a new era.
It's a new era.
It's an era of change.
It's seismic change. And I think you've raised the concept of the church and men's place in the church.
Yep.
I think what we have here is a crucial question around leadership. Most big systemic problems are often leadership problems. We can just expect that the clergy are going to fix everything and there's people in the pews just happy to turn up. It's a leadership question. To bring men into the life of the church, we need some really passionate leaders. And we have some great bishops, we have some great priests, but we also need some really dynamic men to step back into their church communities and start to lead.
10% of registered Catholics participating in regular worship, and of those 10%, about 3% that are male. So there's a diminishing maleness about church,
Huge.
Isn't there?
Yeah. Look, I've got a 9-year-old son who I absolutely adore. And, the investment you need to make and the intentionality you need to bring to help him understand that spirituality, that faith are things that men do. I think we've really lost that. Just on the weekend, my wife started running a small group for one of our daughters and all her friends. So it's a group of sort of 10 or 12-year-old girls. They did banners and they had journals and they love this stuff. And I said to her, it's just for men, we just don't often have that context of how do we bring our sons and boys into that same experience. So for myself, I've started to get very intentional about, what if no one's coming to the rescue? What if the cavalry doesn't arrive? How do I bring my son into faith and into the life of the church? So if we have more men thinking that way, because I think it's time that we stepped up and we grew up. No one's necessarily going to do this for us. No. So it's a leadership question. And all of this, of course, framed in the context of dependence on Christ, the grace of the sacraments, those things that empower us to be able to do this.
That's true.
So there's a lot to do, but I'm excited about it that we're having these conversations, that we're going to have the guests that you're all going to meet in the weeks ahead. I think we've got some richness here, and at least the conversation's beginning. Yeah,
so let's just go one more step into the leadership question, and that is about fathers.
Yep.
Fathers and fatherlessness. We have the big issue now where a lot of young people are growing up without dads, without male figures in the home. We said about leadership in the church and is the father's responsibility, but it starts with the earthly fathers, the biological fathers, and the stepfathers, the good stepfathers, to raise men, and like you're doing with your boys, and I've tried to do with my boys. They're a bit older now. That there is a responsibility in society for fathers to do their job. Again, no training. Most important vocation in the world. Have kids and no training.
You've made it's a massive point. You and I have talked about this before. Professor Paul Vitz at the State University of New York did a 500-year longitudinal study of all the key atheists, going back even past, Descartes, looking at, not that Descartes was an atheist, but back at that historical moment, coming all the way through the Enlightenment. Into postmodernism. So we look at our Marx, Trotsky, Lenin, Mao, all these people, even Freud to a degree, Carl Jung.
Hitler.
Look, you can look at guys like Freud and Jung and say, well, they also brought some great psychological insight and benefit.
Thinking.
But the point he made in his study was that the thing that united, really militant atheists was, and again, Jung was deeply spiritual, but a lot of these very driven atheist figures were, the thing that united them, according to Vitz's research, was the absence of a father or a highly destructive relationship with their own father.
Abusive,
So for me, it's probably the relationship par excellence. And it's amazing what God can do, because for men and men watching this who've got fractured or wounded father relationships, we have a God of what's possible, not what's impossible, and the healing that can come, especially through this kind of work, the kind of series that we're doing here, that if you haven't had that experience of a positive father relationship, then healing is possible. And what I love to say to people is, he's a God of generational change. And if you've come from a background of wounding or, a damaged father relationship, I like to say to people, one of the best ways is just to get even, and that's to create a generational shift by really deepening your own relationship with Christ, allowing Him and God the Father to father you, and then to bring that into your own parenting. You make a great point. Where do we get any training? Where do we get any training? I'm just so grateful to God that the more that I become dependent on Him, the more that He has given me the capacity and the ability to be a father to my own home. And the last thing I wanted to say before I forget was there's a beautiful concept for the word husband. Often when I'm speaking, yeah. I've always fascinated by etymology, by the roots of key words. The word husband actually comes into Old English from the Nordic, and husband comes from the word husboa, which means the house dweller, or he who dwells in the home. I always find that so poignant, that to be a father, and the fathers that we need, and I want to encourage everybody watching, what we need is men who are in the home, who are present, engaged, and healed, and that's got to come through a relationship with God first.
Yeah, great. So Jonathan, I think this is a reasonable spot for us to take this big, heavyweight material and narrow it down to a couple of points, maybe some take-homes for our great audience. It's really exciting to have you with us, but we'll want to leave you with a couple of points. I'll give you two, and Jonathan will bring a couple of points too as well. The first point that I'd like to make for you, our audience, is this. If you are experiencing wounding from your father and you have a fatherlessness, you have a heart that's been broken by lack of fathering, inadequate fathering, abusive fathering, or absent fathering, this can be dealt with. Be not afraid, it's possible. If you take your heart to the Heavenly Father, the Father from whom all fatherhood draws its name, your heart can be healed and you can become strong and be the man God made you to be. And the second point, and this also is related to the first point, is take responsibility for your life. You are responsible. It's nobody else's job and it's nobody else's opportunity. It's your opportunity. Be responsible, response-able. Take charge of your life.
The thing I want to remind people of is something that I don't think spoken about enough, is to remind every man watching this, if no one else has told you this, you have an enemy. Jesus tells us that there is a thief and he comes to steal and to kill and to destroy.
John 10.
It's a crucial scripture. You see, we know that Satan will be ultimately defeated. That battle has already been lost on Calvary.
We read the book.
And what I teach people is that he only has one strategy left. In his rage at not being able to take over from God, he simply desires to separate you as a man from all that God has for you. If you knew that somebody was out to really make your life awful, then push back and step into the things that God has for you. And related to that really is my second point, which is simply around intentionality, which I think is going to come up with a few of our guests, is God is God. He can miraculously intervene in your life tomorrow and change everything. But if he doesn't, what he's going to do is invite you, prompt you in the Holy Spirit to make small steps. You might be watching this today and there's somebody you need to phone, or there's an email you need to send, or there's you need to come home from work early and spend an extra half an hour with one of your children. This is what we call intentionality. When I get back home after filming this, I'm going to fly back to where I live. I need to be intentional with my children. So for me, in summary, know that you have an enemy who wants to separate you from all that God has, and be intentional about stepping into the amazing abundance and life that God really has for you as possible. So from us, this has been our first episode. We're so excited that you could spend the time with us. It's been a real privilege to have what I think is the greatest commodity in the world at the moment. That's time. And you've lavished your time on us. I hope there's been something in there for you. Make sure you tune in next week. We're going to have another fantastic guest join us. We're going to explore some new topics, and we really want you to stay with us over the coming weeks, because you never know when the Holy Spirit's going to open up a topic that's going to bless you. Robert, I've really enjoyed this first episode. Thanks for sharing your wisdom with us.
Jonathan, thank you as well. We really enjoyed being with you. Go and get your friends, get all your relatives, bring them for the next episode. We'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining us today. We'd like to hear what you thought of today's session. Share your feedback with us at podcast@shalomworld.org. You can motivate and support us today. shalomworld.org/donate. Visit shalomworld.org for more information about Shalom World podcasts. To get the latest updates, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Shalom World Podcasts. Shalom World Podcasts is now available on all online platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and others.